week 4 of the fantasy football season, and here's a few defense DST units I looked to hit off the wire this week. The first one, the Philadelphia Eagles. So the Eagles, they've been playing great football the first 3 weeks of the season here, and they're going out there and getting the job done. Week 1 at Detroit, I know wasn't a good fantasy day. 35 points allowed, a sack, and Into pick 6 in that one. Week 2 versus Minnesota, 7 points allowed, 2 sacks, 3 Intos. And week 3 at the Washington football team, 6 points allowed, 9 sacks, and a fumble recovery. So Carson Wentz, he was a crash test dummy in that week 3 ball game. But right here, tougher matchup, week 4 versus Jacksonville. This offense has actually been moving the football and have a decent offensive line, but I still think the Eagles could get a lot of work done in this ball game, especially coming off a 12 and an 18-point fantasy day. So right here in week 4 versus Jacksonville, it's a little tougher of a matchup, I think, than the Commanders, but I still think this Eagle defense is going to play good football. It's another home game for them, and surprisingly, right now, they're available in 44% of fantasy leagues is this defense, and I'll add them this week. The next one, the Arizona Cardinals. So the Cardinals, it's been a tough start so far for them, 1-2 on the season, and the defense, they really haven't done much so far in the early going. Week 1 versus Kansas City, 44 points allowed, a fumble recovery. Week 2 with the Raiders, 23 points allowed, a sack, fumble recovery, a touchdown. And week 3 versus the Rams, not a horrible game, but not much in terms of fantasy football. 20 points allowed, a sack, and a fumble recovery. But week 4 here, it's a 1-week matchup-based type of thing here for Arizona at the Carolina Panthers. Right now, I think they could get to Baker Mayfield in this game. And right here, they don't want to fall to 1-3 in week 4 at Carolina. We know this Carolina offense isn't that good. DJ Moore's been struggling. Baker Mayfield, he's not really getting the ball out there as well to most of his receivers and his playmakers. And I think Arizona can make a few plays in this ball game. And their defense available in 98% of fantasy leagues. The next defense is the Indianapolis Colts. So this Colt defense, they held their own versus a tough Kansas City Chief offense, and they were dropped in 45% of fantasy leagues. But right now, they're back on the fantasy radar, even after I recommended dropping them last week on my defenses to drop. So week 1 at Houston, 20 points allowed, 3 sacks, a fumble recovery. Week 2 at Jacksonville, 24 points allowed. And then week 3 versus the Chiefs, played a great ball game, 17 points allowed, a sack, an Into, and a fumble recovery. So right here, week 4, you know it's going to be a hard-hitting game. You know it's going to be a dogfight type of game in the trenches. And the Colts, they always play better at home, just like most teams, obviously, especially this defense. So the Titans coming into town week 4 here in a divisional matchup. And I think the Colts in this one could have a decent ball game. And right now, if you need a defense in a pinch or you want to stream them this week here, they're available in 65% of fantasy leagues. But right here, they're streaming defense. I don't know if they're at the point yet, is this Colt defense like they were last season when they could use them weekly. The next defense is the Jacksonville Jaguars. So the Jaguars, I don't like the matchup at all versus Philly in week 4. But right now, this Jaguar team, that definitely a team that's got to be talked about, especially after shutting out a pretty solid Colts offense, even though I know Michael Pittman didn't play in week 2. And then versus a good Charger offense, obviously, even though Herbert wasn't 100% and Keenan Allen was out, they played great football. So the last few weeks here for them, week 2 versus Indy, 5 sacks, no points, 3 interception. And week 3 at the Chargers, 10 points allowed, a sack, and Into, fumble recovery. So right here, surprisingly, this will be the toughest defense Jalen Hurts starts against early going in the season here. So far, he's had pretty good matchups versus Detroit in week 1. Week 2, Minnesota, not a great D. And week 3, shredded up that Commander defense. So right here, week 4, Jacksonville maybe could give them some trouble, but they're not a defense that I have high on the priority list. But they're definitely a defense to talk about, especially only giving up 10 points in the last 2 ball games here is this Jaguar defense. And this team might be turning the corner with Trevor Lawrence leading these guys. They got a lot of guys on this team that can make plays, and they're young and up-and-coming teams, this Jacksonville team, and their defense available in 96% of fantasy leagues. And the 5th and final defense, DST unit, I look to get off the wire this week. So Miami Dolphins. So the Dolphins have played 2 great out of 3 ball games in terms of points allowed in the early going. Week 1 versus New England, 7 points allowed, 2 sacks, and Into, 2 fumble recoveries, including a scoop and score touchdown. Week 2 with Baltimore, that was just a classic shootout where they won, 38 points allowed in that one. In week 3 versus Buffalo, 17 points allowed, only 4 sacks and a fumble recovery. I know Josh Allen threw for 400 yards just about in that ball game. But this Dolphin defense, they made it tough on him, and they got to him 4 times in the ball game. So week 4 here versus a weak Cincinnati Bengal offensive line, not an offense in general, but an O-line. I think this Dolphin defense could get a few sacks on Joe Burrow and possibly get a few turnovers on him as well. We've seen Burrow crack under pressure early on in the season. Dallas got to him 6 times in week 2, and week 1 he turned the ball over 5 times versus Pittsburgh. So right here, this Miami D-line pretty solid. They get to the quarterback, and this Bengal offensive line not that good. So right here, I think Miami's a decent option to use in week 4 here. And they're available over 80% of fantasy leagues. So that's a few defense DST units I look to add on the wire here for week 4 of the fantasy football season.